Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Today, ORSAM is organizing a panel on the Libyan conflict. As we all know, and as the followers also know, that there has been various developments as regard to Libyan conflict. There are various peace initiatives and meetings in Germany and in Morocco. And the objective of these meetings is, of course, to end the conflict in a peaceful way. But due to various reasons and maybe as a result of the involvement of or negative involvement of some international actors, the conflict has been continuing to this day. But there seems to be a strong will to end the conflict by parties. And even there is, from time to time, and more recently, we see that more often there is some kind of understanding between domestic parties as well as external actors. So this gives us some hope that the conflict would be somehow resolved, and the Libyans would reach to a peaceful environment. And in order to discuss the recent developments and the perspective of some of the regional and international actors, we would like to discuss the issue with the experts from various institutions. And I would like to thank all of them for participating in this panel. Maybe I can briefly introduce them to you. First, we have Dr. Celal Hershavi. He is working in Klingendijk Institute in the Netherlands, in The Hague. And we have Mr. Tarek Megarisi. He's a fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. And we have Mr. Noman Sharkawi. He's also a researcher. And we have Mr. Farhad Polat. He's working for TRT World Research Center. So I would like to give the floor to Dr. Celal, who will give us a brief introduction about the conflict's current status and maybe the current dynamics, as well as recent developments with regard to Libyan conflict. Please, Mr. Celal. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I feel very honored to be on this panel with Tarek and Farhad and Noman. I just wanted to spend a few minutes to kind of give you maybe the latest picture of what I gather in terms of the situation on the ground, because we're basically approaching the end of the year. It's no longer the month of June. The month of June was a very climatic moment, and it's far away. We kind of have information about the post-June 2020 trends. Since the end of the summer, the Libyan political landscape has seen, I would say, the reactivation of many old tensions that we were seeing before April 2019. April 2019, obviously, is the moment when Marshal Khalifa Haftar made that very unilateral decision to launch an offensive on the capital. These old antagonisms, although very varied and often still diffuse at this stage, all have one thing in common. They find their roots in the absence of armed combat since June. It has been very quiet, not because I would call it peace or anything like that. It's just that there has been a quieting down of the overall situation. The dynamic has been basically, since Haftar's military defeat, there has been a dust settling kind of atmosphere. The dust has been settling, and there hasn't been a lot of lively warlike activity. In fact, this quieting down in terms of the territorial status quo is actually desired by Russia, by Turkey. I mean, those two are not allies, but we also know that they're not enemies, and we know that they speak on a very regular basis together. And on top of it, there is also a desire on the part of Egypt to avoid war, if at all possible. And of course, I wouldn't want to minimize the agency of the Libyans themselves. There is a whole majority, I would say, of Libyan factions that are not interested in a renewed war. And this relatively static situation, of course, comes with political, social, economic, and military ramifications. The calm that I have been describing allows both Turkey on the one hand and the Russian Emirati duo on the other to consolidate their respective military means and military platform. In the case of whatever proxy actors work with Russia and the Emirates, there's also an effort to restructure, reorganize, change the org chart, and introduce other dynamics in terms of, for example, speaking directly with some of the Sudanese mercenary leaders, as opposed to always going through the Haftar family. And this new consolidation will be used maybe to just better resist, or perhaps to better attack later on. The same ambient calm also pushes the population at large. And here I'm really speaking about the Libyan population throughout the country. I'm not singling out any particular city or province. Because of the calm, it is much easier for the population to fully appreciate the absurd nature of their day-to-day conditions. For example, knowing that their country is a big producer of energy and not having electricity. The electricity outages have been increasingly long and increasingly frequent throughout the summer. I'm not even mentioning other issues like banknote shortage, which for the first time has been quite acute in the East, and not just the rest of the country, and of course COVID-19 as a pandemic that is really taking on a dimension that is worrisome. And I would, of course, need to mention the increasing tensions within alliances that we got used to perceiving as monolithic. When Haftar was actively attacking the capital, it was easy to kind of have this optical illusion that all those actors and factions resisting him were forming a big happy family, and forgetting all the deep fractures that we all knew about before April 2019. And in a very predicted manner, all those fault lines have come back. Of course, they are slightly different now, but they are worrisome. For example, between Zawiya and some of the Misrata proxies in Tripoli, naming only that example, but there are others. So this asks questions about how, for example, Turkey is going to have to deal with this, and hopefully we will be able to discuss it today. And on the international scene, I'm talking about the diplomatic spheres here. The same calm, the calm that I keep describing and mentioning since the beginning, has effectively been perceived as a fantastic window of opportunity, which it is. It is, of course, a window of opportunity, and I think the UN and a lot of the German and American mediators are right to call it that way. But I would say also that there's a question mark as to how optimistic one should really be. There's an unusual amount of optimism dominating this diplomatic process that is trying to get kick-started in a few days and a few weeks in the form of an official resumption of the political dialogue with an intention to announce a new presidential council, and if that goes well, announce a brand new government of national unity that would be one unified cabinet for the entire country. Demilitarization of CERT. A few months ago, there was this question of how we would be able to get a demilitarization of both CERT and Jufra. And of course, that has shrunk quietly over the weeks. And now people speak about a semi-demilitarization of CERT, knowing that Qardabiya, the airport, is probably not going to be vacated by the Russian presence that is currently there. So I'm not going to speak for too long, but there's also the question of the resumption of oil exports. That is obviously a reflection of the fact that the military situation within some of the key oil facilities is different today compared to 3 or 6 months ago. And that was key in order to be able to kind of push Haftar into accepting a resumption of the oil export as a political opportunity to become visible again. The bottom line is that the blockade is in the process of basically fading away and yielding a real resumption back to normalcy almost within the next couple of months, hopefully. And that basically asks a lot of questions about what to do regarding the finances and the fresh injections of dollars coming from those new sales. There was a question of changing the central bank in Tripoli. But at the same time, in reality, the central bank in Tripoli has no intention to change in terms of its configuration. So there's a tug of war that is also happening as we speak. So hopefully I will have given you a good atmosphere or a good feel of this deceiving calm, to use a phrase that was used by Heiko Maas, the foreign minister of Germany. And I think it's a very apt phrase. I think there's a lot of facets, at least, to the current calm that are promising and others that are misleading. I believe that if you watch some of the military activity in the northern part of the Fezzan, the southwest of Libya, you see an increasing assertiveness, an increasing, an intensifying activity on the part of the Haftar coalition there. So it's possible that we might witness an offensive going back into the north and maybe an attempt to take some of the borderline cities like Shweiref. So a lot of ambivalence, a lot of ambiguity. Some areas actually warrant profound optimism, but I would like to qualify it. And I think I would leave you with this relatively grayish picture, which is not completely, we should not just rush and open a bottle of champagne. Hopefully I will have given you a different message. We have to, everybody, all observers, regardless of their political orientation, have to be very careful and ask a lot of questions regarding security, regarding the economy, regarding the social conditions for the population, and of course potential disconnects between the diplomatic realm and military reality on the ground, whether we're talking about Libyan actors or foreign actors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jalal, for this insightful talk, rather pessimistic one, but realistically reflecting the realities of the situation. And of course, it is always too early to celebrate, or in the preparation of celebration for a possible peace. And we as the conflict in Libya is very multidimensional, and it is very hard to reach a consensus by all parties. We have Russia, we have United Arab Emirates, and Egypt's position. And so, yes, you are correct to be pessimistic, but of course, there are initiatives also to resolve the conflict, and meetings. And more recently, there was a Moroccan peace initiative So we would like to hear more about these developments from Mr. Nouman Sharkawi, and he will give us a brief explanation of what happened there and what could be the outcome and how it can affect the Libyan conflict. So please, Mr. Nouman.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity. And I agree a lot with what Jala said about the on-the-ground dynamics. Personally, I'm going to be discussing Morocco's past and present peacemaking initiatives in Libya. So I'll break it down to just like the ethos of Moroccan foreign policy, and then I'll look at the LPA a little bit, then Bouznika, and then how I see this moving forward. So Libyan conflict, as we all know, is an African issue with profound consequences, and primarily for Libyans, of course, but also for the greater region. And so Morocco has been in a position where it needed to react to events in 2011. And Moroccan foreign policy is basically revolves around its soft power and it revolves around diplomacy. So you can see this all over the African region, but particularly in Libya after the coup d'etat happened in 2011. There was no real love lost between Gaddafi and Gaddafi's regime in Morocco. They had years of tensions before that and just different policy aims in general. So after that happened, Morocco was very responsive to supported the Libyan people, believed in seeing a peaceful transition, and this was a pattern in the Arab Spring for Morocco because compared to other maybe more ideologically driven powers, it was a lot more pragmatic. Domestic concerns were immediately discussed, and so there's a difference in the level of animosity shown, and that's what happened in Libya. So we saw Morocco join the contact group for Libya. And because of the ethno-linguistic and centuries of connections between both countries, Morocco's positive neutrality approach was actually pretty productive for Libya. And then, so over the years between 2011 and 2015, when the LPA was signed, we saw a lot of polarization. We saw a lot of fragmentation, unfortunately. And so the democracy that countries wanted to see prosper in Libya, unfortunately, just did not occur. So Morocco started negotiations started in the UN early 2015 about how to make this Khairat agreement come along. And then Morocco shifted from an accompanying partner to more of a co-mediator in that regard. And it was a great opportunity to unite the institutions, and about 40 meetings were held from Ghadames to Geneva to Khairat. And it was a particularly necessary moment during the LPA signing, just contrary to maybe perhaps some revisionist perspectives. We saw in late 2014, we saw Gaddafi start his Operation Karama. We saw November 2014, the Supreme Court in Libya call the HOR in Tobruk unconstitutional. We saw loose coalitions start to prosper. So the LPA was an attempt by Morocco and other foreign powers in that period to unite institutions, to bring Libyans together around one dialogue, to make a Libyan-led, Libyan-owned approach. It was only going to be a first step, and it could have been a success because it was going to separate the extremist actors from the more moderate ones. Unfortunately, the agreement had gaps. So these gaps were exploited after the agreement was signed in December 17. We saw Haftar immediately rejected. We saw Aguila Saleh rejected, but then not rejected. And it was just, it was a really blurry picture in terms of how it was actually going to function. So while there was an agreement on the desire to bring institutions together, there was an agreement on who would be involved, etc. And this could be also linked to Libya's past. Unfortunately, with Gaddafi, he didn't leave any political entities. He didn't leave any institutions. Political parties were banned. Things were done through ad hoc popular committees, through diktats from the top. So they weren't really accustomed, perhaps, to a more regimented, more structured sort of way to do things, unfortunately. And then, so then the LPA was signed, it was exploited. We saw two PC members start boycotting, Omar al-Aswad from Zintan, Ali Faj Qatarani from the eastern side. So it started to lose that teeth that initially international parties wanted. And so US official in that period said when you drive on ice, you accelerate, you don't press on the brakes. And that was one of the reasons the LPA was so necessary and has actually created institutions which are still valid now, like primarily the Government of National Accord, which has the Presidency Council, which has the High Council of State. So these two entities are still relevant now and will be most likely part of any future solution. The parties that have been who have risen through this the LPA are most likely going to be involved moving forward. So Libyan representatives can adjust the LPA as they see fit, amend it as they see fit. And so after it was signed, we saw Haftar engage in the 2016 oil crescent. He went on an offensive, and then in 2019, another offensive on Tripoli, which coincidentally happened at the same time as a international convention. If it was a coincidence or not, it's relatively dubious because there is perhaps a pattern there. And then, so we saw the Berlin conference occur after the LPA was signed. Morocco was excluded, which was an interesting decision considering Morocco's inherent connection to Libya and connection to the Sahelo-Maghrebian region. And the Republic of the Congo was invited. So that sort of could give you an idea how Morocco felt about that. And but throughout the course of this conflict, Morocco has been on good terms with the GNA, but has also kept open channels with the East, because to be a mediator, you have to be able to balance both. And then, so that's what we saw now more recently with Buznika, which was an effort to combat extreme polarization. So because Haftar is perhaps more legitimized by conflict than he is by peace, and Gila Saleh is perhaps the reverse. So there were efforts to invite Gila Saleh and Khalid al-Mishri to Morocco in early July. Gila Saleh was meant to come here after he visited Algeria, but Algeria told him they just canceled the meeting ostensibly on the fact that Gila Saleh was very sympathetic to the Egyptian proposal, which was going to marginalize Algeria's role and was going to lead, according to Tebboune, to a Somaliization of Libya. So Gila Saleh came to Morocco instead. There have been meetings since then with the HCS and the HOR. We've seen they came here at the invitation of Habib al-Malki, who was the Speaker of Parliament here. And they started discussing on how sovereign positions should be allocated. So they used the LPA, the Libyan political agreement, which is still a legitimate framework. And they used Article 15 particularly to see how they were going to allocate these sovereign positions. Unfortunately, questions remain about whether if these talks are actually representative. So any long-term solution for Libya is going to require diversified buy-in. It's going to require actors who actually have interests on the ground to be invited. And there were some questions about people who were invited to, was not only Buznika, but also Montreux, also Egypt, also Geneva, whether these parties are actually the parties that should be invited, and whether are they just being opportunistic, or are they just trying to buy exposure just in case they're marginalized moving forward. So that's why, to go back to Jalal, I wouldn't necessarily call it pessimism as much as I would call it reservedness, and I share that reservedness with him, because any solution that's going to happen in Tunis next month is going to have to not only unite all these disparate initiatives, but unite all these disparate institutions and in different agendas and different foreign actors. It's also going to have to deal with the on-the-ground dynamics, where you see mines still being planted in Sirt, you still see movements, you see the Sirt-Jufra line constantly being consolidated, you see the GNA's Ministry of Defense telling you that there might be an impending offensive. So there are a lot of things which perhaps wouldn't make someone necessarily optimistic, which is completely unfortunate. But to go back to what the UN, the Libyan representative to the UN said, multiple dialogues is better than multiple battlefronts. So as long as it does stay within this diplomatic track and we can actually see some movement in this regard, Morocco, that is its number one priority, is to see a Libyan-led, Libyan-owned approach, is to see it's because Libya is a brotherly nation, so Libya's prosperity is important. We need a stable region. In 2011, what happened in the crisis, there were 20 million weapons or something, which led to Tuareg members who were part of Gaddafi's military. They went to Mali, they tried to start an independent state, and extremism in the Sahel has only exacerbated since then. So Morocco has been affected already by this crisis, and moving forward does not want to see Libya it's the brotherly nation calls to actually be suffering through something like this. But the facts remain what they are, and there needs to be more work done to unite all these initiatives and just make sure that they're actually going to be representative and they're actually going to be the solution that Libya can actually work with long term. And some actors from Morocco are perhaps not the most encouraging to work with. For example, Haftar and his reliance on Salafi Madkhalism doesn't necessarily link up with Morocco's Sufi, Malki religious spiritual diplomacy. So that could explain some of its reluctance not to support the UN recognized government. And so Morocco has always stuck with the UN recognized side of this. And it's also not on the same wavelength with Egypt when it comes to Libya, mostly because maybe Sisi has done certain things which aren't necessarily in Morocco's interests. So yeah, overall, we're going to see just the GNA, we might see a Khera 2.0, we might see a new presidential council with Sarraj's resignation. But unfortunately, if these solutions are actually going to bear fruit is what remains. And yeah, that's my part. Mm-hmm. I'm hoping for the best.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Norman, for explaining us the Morocco's position and initiatives. And as you rightly say, Morocco has a lot of reasons to be worried about the negative outcomes of the conflict in Libya, and that's why they are doing their best to somehow find a solution or to contribute to the possible peace solution. And they will continue to do so. But there are also European initiatives either affecting conflict in a positive way or sometimes in a negative way. But to understand them more clearly, we have Mr. Tarek Magarisi. So he will give us some information about what position European countries has been taking. Well, of course, it is a very wide topic, but he will probably be a more brief. So, Mr. Tarek, please.
Thank you very much, Doctor, and thank you for inviting me here to speak today on this very prestigious panel. Yeah, so, you know, the European perspective or policy for Libya is probably one that is of significant interest because Europe has always been seen to play a leading role on Libya. You know, whilst the US led from behind in 2011, it was the French and the British who led from the French. Sorry, I can just threw me off. But yeah, so even, you know, since the revolution took place, the majority of SRSGs, of special representatives of the UN, have been European. And it's usually, you know, European initiatives that sit alongside and in support of the UN process. But, you know, as much as there's interest, there's often a lot of conflation and misunderstanding about, you know, what is a EU or a European position as opposed to what is the position and the perspectives and activities of the various member states and the different capitals. And Europe is not perhaps as united as the name European Union might lead one to believe. And so when, you know, it goes up to the level of Brussels, EU policy is kind of always that of the lowest common denominator. It's a response to what can collectively be perceived as a threat. And, you know, this is something which Turkey has managed to trigger in the European perspective with its intervention last year. Perhaps not so much the actual intervention and the stopping of Haftar's assault as the maritime agreement which took place alongside the security partnership, how that came about, its impact on the Eastern Mediterranean. And, you know, since the war has paused in June, the ongoing security sector reform work and what that might cause further down the line in terms of consequences for a migration controlling policy, and also the commercial ties being built off of the peace now. And there is a bit of disquiet in Europe as to where this might actually end up leading. You know, They see the air base in Mutia. There are a remarkable amount of equipment and flights that is being sent over there. And there is a back of the mind fear that, you know, Turkey might be working or might decide to try to work with Russia to the displacement of Europe and their prominent position of the diplomatic track in Libya, as kind of what happened in Syria with the Astana process. But, you know, by and large, as I mentioned at the start, European states have pursued a national level rather than kind of a continental level policy. And they view Libya very much through the lens of their national capitals. And, you know, as we see that Libya is perhaps a weather vane of kind of shifting geopolitical trends and dynamics. And whilst that might have been okay in 2011, it might have even worked in 2018-19, it's left Europeans kind of, okay, they want to pursue their own policy and what they believe their interests to be on a national level, but because they don't work on a continental level, they don't have the required weight and gravity to counterbalance that. And, you know, we have two very clear opposites, or what are considered to be the opposites of the European case, France and Italy. France, you know, it went full Haftar. It went completely behind Haftar on a diplomatic angle from 2014-15. And this kind of showcased that Libya's importance to France as Libya itself was almost purely through the counterterrorism or the security threat. But Libya's real value was not Libya itself, it was Libya as a geopolitical entity. It was a regional issue, you know, something which can be used to improve and strengthen the relationship with the United Arab Emirates, but also something which could be used to buttress and to help France's other goals in the Sahel. And this is something that kind of persists today. So, you know, even in the post-June landscape, where Haftar is a considerably diminished personality or political figure, you know, France continued to engage, and French insistence remains on the diplomatic level that Haftar should be considered to be part of the process going forward. And, you know, there is an internal logic to that position. The argument that, you know, Haftar shouldn't be completely frozen out, it's not without validity. But it's very interesting to note that the only two parties which persist with this line is France and the UAE. You know, even the Egyptians and the Russians to some extent are trying to pivot away from Haftar. A lot of the Libyan groups, even those in eastern Libya, have tried to suffocate Haftar, essentially, to try and hope that he might disappear. And, you know, the Italians might be held up as the kind of counterbalance to this. We've seen a lot of headlines over the years about France versus Italy. But they're essentially doing something similar in the sense that they are pursuing Rome's interest above perhaps Europe's interest. And Rome's entrenchment in Western Libya, its network, its of relationships and contacts, it really shouldn't be underestimated. And, you know, for Italy, Libya is a special country. They have a special relationship with them. It is often perceived to be the fourth shore of Italy, despite the colony and the colonial era being long finished. There is the issue of energy and economic interest, sure, but Libya in turn can affect Italy. It perhaps inspired to a certain extent this extreme fascination or this extreme fixation on migration, and it was this fixation that led Italy to kind of disengage slightly, and it found itself in a situation when Haftar was in the ascendancy, where it was so scared of losing out entirely that it tried to hedge its bets. So we've kind of gone full circle with Italy, when they went from being the most prominent of Europeans to the most displaced, and now in the post-Haftar landscape, they are worming their way back into it. You know, they are using that network of contacts in Western Libya to rebuild that relationship with Tripoli. They are behind the scenes working with a lot of the other foreign interventionists And whilst the spotlight might be on Germany and the UN and the main process, it is Italy with a very active foreign minister and a much more coherent government than perhaps they had 3 years ago, that is doing a lot of the background diplomacy and deal making on an elite level to try to ensure that whatever happens in Geneva won't actually be scuppered later on down the line. And I'm going to wrap up with just some words on Germany, because they are perhaps the one that is funny that I haven't mentioned yet, considering the Berlin process and the Berlin conference, but they're actually the third wave of the Europeans, if you would. And from the German perspective, they see a kind of 19th century style great game taking place. And whilst the French and the Italian responses to this might be okay, let's enter the fray and try to protect our own interests, the German response is to say, well, we know how this ends. It doesn't end well. So we should assert kind of normative multilateralism as the response to the great game. And I think this is a position which is starting to grow and resonate to a greater extent on the European, on the continent or on the Brussels level. So they had this Berlin process, which was a response really to Salameh's exasperation in Libya, that he could organize a Libyan peace process only to have it destroyed from the outside. And so his way to kind of say that, before we proceed on the Libyan front, we should have some kind of order, some kind of agreement on the international scene. And just to quickly respond to kind of Naaman's point, although, I definitely don't speak for the Germans, the reason why kind of Morocco or Algeria even were not invited was because the idea of the process was to say, let's sit down amongst this group of those who actually have boots on the ground, who are intervening and meddling in the Libyan process to try to get an agreement. And then unfortunately, because diplomacy is diplomacy and geopolitics is geopolitics, this all kind of spiraled. And the reason why states like Congo were there was from an African perspective, because they were also planning their own conference as a follow-up. So when you're met with kind of competing or possibly divergent tracks, you can either try to co-opt it or you can let it perhaps undermine you. And that's really the only reason why Congo was there and Morocco weren't. But as Libya comes to kind of embody the big geopolitical risks or the big picture topics that I mentioned at the start, it is the German approach that is starting to gain momentum and traction. And whilst I think there will always be constraints on this by French and Italian activism, I think that the trend that's starting with new kind of sanctions from the EU on Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner group and somebody who's close to Russia, is something that we should look out for. This is going to be a momentum where Europe tries to kind of back up the Berlin process and the UN process as a way of confronting the great game with an attempt at returning to normative multilateralism. And I'll end on that note. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tarek, for this also great talk, and you clearly differentiated the positions of the European actors and how each actors, especially France and Italy, pursue different agendas, and how these agendas somehow, especially France's agenda, is not helping resolving the conflict. And as you say, Germany's initiatives will probably gain more momentum, and probably more countries will be involved in this process, more actors. And are you now, do you have to leave, or will you stay a bit longer, Mr. Tarek?
Unfortunately, I will have to leave you in about 10 minutes. My apologies.
Okay, no worries. We will be hopefully talking in other panels. And thank you for your contribution. And you can leave whenever you have to after like 10 minutes. And now we will continue with Mr. Ferhat Polat, and he will give us the position of Turkey. He will give us an overview of Turkey's position And as we all know, Turkey has been pursuing a constructive agenda in the Libyan conflict, and despite all the attempts to prevent Turkey's contribution, still Ankara is very eager and very keen on contributing the ending of the conflict. So, Mr. Ferhat, please, we would like to hear you now.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and it's a great to be part of this discussion. And I'd like to start by saying that since Gaddafi was toppled almost 10 years now, Libya still faces severe social and political difficulties of democratic transition. The toppling of Gaddafi regime created a number of domestic and international issues, unfortunately. In that case, the interference of some of the foreign countries, unfortunately, has deepened the conflict further and caused political fragmentation and polarization in the country. With regard to Turkish involvement in Libya, I'd like to begin with brief information how Turkey has involved in the Libyan conflict. Turkey has supported United Nations recognized governments of nation accord led by Fayez al-Sarraj since 2015 when GNA was created and sponsored by United Nations. And in return, opposite side led by warlord Khalifa Haftar, who has supported by a number of countries, including neighboring Egypt, United Arab Emirates, Russia, and France. And in the face of Haftar's offensive on the capital, GNA has requested help from a number of countries, including the US, UK, Algeria, Italy, and Turkey. And in practical terms, it seems only Turkey has responded to their request, and Turkey has intervened and supported the legitimacy of Libya's government and supported and provided tangible support like sending tactical assets such as armed drones and air defense system. That has shifted the balance on the ground, but it must be said that it should be said the Turkish involvement in Libya wasn't planned or had a strategic plan. It came rather as a reaction to the development on the ground. And in November, as you know, Turkey has signed two separate memorandum of understanding, one on maritime agreement, which prevented a failed accompli in the Eastern Mediterranean and protect the rights of Libyan and Turkish interest in the region. And second one on a military cooperation agreement, which was crucial at the time for GNA. And a few months after Turkey has involved in the Libyan conflict, the dynamic has changed on the ground very handsomely, and Turkish involvement became very prominent and prevented Haftar's offensive. And not only Tripoli was saved, and also GNA were able to regain some of the crucial territories like Al-Watiya military base, which has been used as an operational hub for Haftar's offensive. And Turkey's role in the Libyan conflict, the Turkish government helped the United-backed government in a moment of need, while other countries, although they recognize GNA as a legitimacy and United Nations recognized government, but they have failed to provide practical support despite recognizing as a legitimate entity in the country. So Turkey has changed the dynamics on the ground and provided significant support. And now we can see the hard power is slightly shifting to smart diplomacy from Turkish side. Turkey is trying to engage with all regional countries as well as with international partners like from Malta and Italy. We have seen several meetings between Malta and Turkey and Italy. The recent Turkish defense minister visited Italy and met with his counterpart. So Turkish involvement saved the legitimacy of the government in Tripoli and saved many Libyan people from western part, and also there are some economic interest and political interest from Turkish side. But Turkey, I think it seems Turkey believes you can discuss economic interest and political interest once the country is stabilized. So Turkish involvement has created a momentum for peace so far. I think now Turkey is trying to cooperate with other international actors to bring lasting and permanent ceasefire in the country. I think so far Turkey has managed to do that, and I think now it's more about the shifting from hard power to smart diplomacy. And I guess now Turkey is doing that. Recently, United States of America's Libya ambassador visited Turkey and discussed how they can provide further security and reforming GNA security and so on. This is crucial for Libya, and Turkey has done its part and provided good and tangible support for UN-backed government. And in terms of future Turkish relation, I can discuss a bit more. Most recently, Libya's GNA, led by Fayez al-Sarraj, visited Istanbul and met with President Erdogan, and with strong representation on both sides. I think Turkey is now hoping to support Libya not only security-wise, also in other aspects like reforming the, helping energy sectors to drilling and so on, also healthcare service, financial help, and this kind of things, and resuming remaining Turkish project before the toppling of Gaddafi regime. Turkey has tied up around $20 billion of contract. Now, I think recently both government, they agreed to resume this work, which is important. And post-conflict Libya also, I think Turkey will play a significant role to support Libya's legitimate government after the war. And I think that still, in many ways, the ceasefire is very shaky, very fragile. In many ways, especially in Sirte, Haftar, he's not no longer, he has a influence, but he has still playing a role of spoiler, and I think he can influence and he can still spoil the ongoing peace process. So Haftar, although he's out of picture in terms of political wise, but in military perspective, he may still spoil the ceasefire. So there are lots of questions about Haftar's future, Haftar's role, and LNA's role. Aguila Saleh represent from eastern side, which I think it's a positive step. He's more representative of political side, but and military side is still a big question for Eastern Libya. As we know, Haftar has broken every single ceasefire and he has violated number of ceasefires. So in the eyes of Libyan people and in the eyes of GNA, I think he's not such a reliable partner. And I believe if he's part of any peace negotiation in the coming days or in the coming months, I think it won't last and it will be violated again, because he's the person who really doesn't believe in democracy and he only wants to install, I think, the kind of military dictatorship like we have seen in Egypt. So Haftar still has support, not like before. I think main supporter of Haftar's project still is United Arab Emirates, and I think financially still support. We have seen recently Egypt seems to change its policy, shifting to support more Aguila Saleh rather than Haftar. France long supported Haftar's project in this case, and because of UAE, and it's aligned with UAE's vision in the region. But now, right now, regional actors like Algeria, I think it seems to be willing to play more role, active role in these peace conferences and peace negotiations. So if regional actors and all Western actors, if they are genuine to find a peaceful solution to the ongoing Libyan crisis, there are possibility and they can succeed, but unless they prevent further attacks and renewed conflict, then I think then the environment will become more available to discuss a peaceful solution in the country.
Okay, Mr. Ferhat, thank you for your take on Turkey's position and also your take on the involvement of regional actors on the conflicts. So before maybe going to the Q&A or even closing the session, I would like to give the opportunity to our president, Professor Ahmet Uysal, to give his remarks as a closing remarks of the panel. So please, Professor Ahmet, share your thoughts with us.
Thank you very much, Dr. Numan. You hear me and you see me well?
Yeah, everything's fine.
Okay. I mean, in the Libyan crisis is a critical crisis. The point is that, you know, we want to, in the recent debate, even though the coup attempt by the Haftar and his supporters, they want to repeat the 2016, where you want to go back and experience the same problem. This is a major danger for Libya, and also maybe for those who believe in the legitimacy of Libya and Libyan democratic aspirations, the Libyans' aspirations for services or municipal services and other services that people are suffering. And the danger is now, I think, the international actors, they want to repeat the same with, of course, I mean, they say democracy, but they don't mean it, like France and others who support the Haftar side, who already, I mean, in 2016, in the Skhirat agreement, they agreed, WIFAQ or accord governments in itself, like even the name, the both sides agreed on the kind of an joint government, but the Trablus side, the Western side, he fulfilled the requirements of the agreement, and the Eastern side, they rejected the agreement. No, they said yes, and they even gave some ministers to the joint government. Then they try to rebel against it, or they make a coup against this legitimate government, I mean UN-backed government, which try to solve the problem. But there are also actors who doesn't want to solve the problem. After the agreement, they get what they want, but they don't want to give anything extra. Even they want to take the whole cake. Yeah, I mean, they want to take Trablus by force. And when people resisted the coup attempt by Haftar for about a year, then Turkey supported the Trablus and the Tripoli government, and they've been able to expand it from, or expel them from around the the western cities. But the danger is still there. I think Haftar side and Aqila, I mean Egypt or Emirates or France, they support, but these are rejected by the people. But they may, they may want to push one more time for an offensive, another coup attempt in a way to take the whole piece with maybe Russia's support. But I think this is gonna fail, and it's not gonna serve anything. We need to support the people, Libyan people's aspirations for democracy and to self-rule. I mean, nobody on the international arena or actors trying to reconcile these sides. They want to add more oil to the fire. We know in Libya there are three sides, historical divisions, but they can live together. You know, as we've seen in Europe after the Second World War, they've been able to reconcile. But these policies are not very much supported in Libya. Also after the revolution, the Libyans were doing well with elections and then putting up a new system, new political system, more based on reconciliation. I mean, Libyans can govern themselves, but we need to give them a chance, and we need to support them. And I don't see this will or this intention from international actors, except for Turkey and some few countries. And this is like a sad story, because I mean, if we don't solve the problem, this coup and this cycle is repeat itself. You know, when again, like Sukhayrat agreement like 4 years ago, and how we gonna make, let's say, Haftar or Aqila or their camp is not gonna rebel against the agreed consensus government. I mean, we have to find, even after, if we find the exit from this crisis or the exit from these negotiations, we need to make sure that they don't rebel again, they don't make a coup against the joint government, but it is a big question. So we have also major services are lacking. I mean, the Libyan people are getting tired and desperate, in a way, hopeless from these discussions. Ordinary people are suffering a lot, and the international community should also help them to maintain their daily life without fears, without services. Sometimes electricity goes, you know, several days, and this is too much in a hot area like Libya. People, you know, cannot find the queues on food and other issues. So we have many suffering in Libya, and international community should pay attention to relieve these sufferings. And Turkey has more, I mean, constructive approach on this. They want to help the Libyans to stand on their feet and to take care of themselves. But I see the international actors today, even with the UN representative, they want to internalize the conflict. I mean, generally internationalization drags on I mean, generally they don't solve the problem. Even they solve it, it takes too long. So we need to give a hope to Libyan people that they can live peacefully and you know, quietly on their life. But unfortunately, you know, there are not many actions in that regard. So I listen to the speakers, and I benefit from their speech, and we learn also from their speeches, and also appreciate their time and contribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ahmed. So I have a few questions for our panelists. First, for Dr. Jalal. Dr. Jalal, I'm curious about the Algerian position on Libya. So Algeria experienced this, the revolutionary style governmental change. And what do you think of their position after the new government, under the new presidency in Algeria? Do you think they will be more active in the coming period, or what position will they follow?
They would like to be more active. They were hoping for some kind of a better alliance with the United States on the one hand, and France, and also there was hope vis-a-vis Russia. I'm talking about the beginning of this year. There was very much a moment of intense hope on the part of the Algerians. I would like to remind everyone that the best Algerian diplomat, the most prestigious one, Mr. La'amra, was presented as a candidate to replace Ghassan Salamé when Salamé resigned and accepted, basically decided to leave his post. And Antonio Guterres was acknowledged the candidacy, and everything seemed to go fine because Amamra was always quite close to Washington, appreciated in New York, within the UN, and everything looked pretty much ready to go. And the last minute, several states kind of revolted using their lobbying networks in Washington. So it's not just Morocco, but also Egyptians and the Emirates. And it's so, to understand the Algerians, you have this desire of actually being active, and also a lot of bitterness and disappointment regarding what happened in February, March. I would like to remind everyone also the fact that Algeria was quite active diplomatically in 2014, 2016. Back then, it was the Bouteflika presidency, but not of the last 2 years. The last 2 years of Bouteflika, the foreign policy of Algeria became much weaker, much more blurry. But in 2014, 2016, for all kinds of reasons that I'm not going to go through, it was pretty cogent and quite well organized, with a decent knowledge of the various actors, real activity in terms of dialogue, talking to a very wide spectrum of factions within Libya, and a good relationship with the US, a good relationship with Britain, with Italy. And believe it or not, Algeria never undermined the Skhirat year of 2015, because you had those fights in the headlines and some of the op-ed articles, but deep down, both Morocco and Algeria knew that they were pretty much looking for the same thing. They wanted the form of compromise in Tripoli to avoid the war that ended up happening in 2019. But a lot of the push in those 2 years was common to both countries, really. But that Algeria was stronger than now. Now it's weakened by a lot of uncertainty domestically, a lot of a very, very difficult environment in terms of economics, and it's a young presidency. So I would say that the foreign policy is weaker. It's weaker in terms of an ability to implement, an ability to revive the old Rolodex contacts that it does have. So I would say that so far I have seen more weakness and more distractedness than anything else. But as it goes back into work that is being done by other countries, I think that Algeria will gradually, but slowly, most probably slowly, will go back to its old self in terms of really deploying good knowledge of Libya, good reputation for real, genuine neutrality. I think a lot of Libyans, even to this day, if you look at the social media, you're never going to see anybody from the Haftar camp insulting Algeria, and nobody from Misrata or Tripoli or anything like that insulting Algeria. So there is a good potential in terms of neutral reputation, and I think it's still a young presidency that will take time before it goes back to its old self. So don't expect too many fireworks.
Okay, yeah, it's of course important point, and Algeria, with its strong ties with many countries and strong presence, there is much more expected from the Algerian leadership, actually, vis-a-vis the Libyan conflict. And Mr. Norman, I would like to also ask about the next month's Tunis conference. I mean, what do you expect from this conference? And do you think Arab Maghreb countries, can they have a common position in this conference or not? What's your take on this?
Okay, so the biggest issue with the Tunis conference is the lack of overarching strategy between all the diplomatic initiatives that are supposed to come to a head in Tunis. So you're seeing like the 5+5 track, which is probably actually the one that is might be the most effective. But you're seeing that, you're seeing the Bouzneqa thing, you're seeing Montreux, you're seeing a lot of these different agreements. And if they're all going to come together to actually create a new presidential council, one that is going to be universally representative, one that's going to have the diversified buy-in, one that's going to make up for the on-the-ground dynamics with Wagner consolidating continuously and not wanting to give up areas, and Haftar consolidating. Yeah, he's becoming more marginalized as a figure, but the LLAF as an institution remains pretty influential in its areas, and it might even try to move into the West, which hence why the MOD, Minister of Defense for the GNA, warned about that. About the Maghreb Union, it is actually a pity that they're not having a bigger role in this, considering African problems and Southern problems perhaps need an African solution and Southern solution first. But in it, we're seeing the internalization of this conflict to a degree where the Maghreb Union hasn't even been given a role. And that's for many reasons, but primarily the Maghreb Union as an institution is dysfunctional. So we saw it is in the Maghreb, it's the most least trade integrated region in the world, right? So you're seeing Libya does not have a government. It's one of the founding members. Algeria and Morocco also, there's a lot of, a little tension there. Maybe many issues, maybe one particular issue. So that's also preventing the Maghreb Union from doing anything. Since its inception, like over 30 agreements, only 6 have been ratified by all 5 member states. So as much as it would be ideal to see the Maghreb Union have a role in this, considering it's in its backyard, unfortunately, the countries are going to have to go at it themselves. And this is what we've seen in the last few years. And this is what explains the disunity in proposals from Algeria's side, from Morocco's side, somewhat from Tunisia's side. They're mediating next month's conference. So then we have to see whether Mauritania also just changed their government early this year. There were tensions with Morocco also, but people were more optimistic in the start of this year than they are now. But so every country really just has to do this independently, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, for Mr. Farhad, which actors do you think Turkey should engage more in somehow coordinating or contributing to the resolution of the Libyan conflict? Would it be Algeria? Would it be Morocco, Tunisia? And also there is the question of more recently Egypt. Can there be somehow an understanding between Egypt and Turkey vis-a-vis the Libyan crisis? What is your take on this? Your microphone is closed.
Sorry. I think from Turkish perspective, I think Turkey is willing to negotiate with any countries who is interested to bring a lasting political settlement in Libya. In this sense, I think Turkey can also cooperate with Algeria and all the other regional actors. But I think Algeria seems to be a bit more closer to cooperate with Turkey. And although Mr. Jalal has mentioned earlier that Algeria has not been criticized by any sides in Libya, but unfortunately Haftar has even threatened to send some of the fighters to destabilize the country in Algeria. So I think Algeria seems to be a bit more closer to the GNA in terms of having legitimacy. That's why I think Turkey could work with Algeria as a regional country, and also Algeria is stronger in terms of military capability and so on. In the international stage, I think also Turkey could work with Italy, both support GNA, although Italy has a concern not to support militarily, but still support diplomatically. So Turkey could work with Algeria in the region, but also other countries if they are interested in terms of providing security and stability in the country.
And Turkey, Egypt?
Recently, there are some signs that Egypt has changed slightly its policy. I think there are backroom deals, people say and claim that Turkey and Egypt already, they are talking on the lower side. And I think if Egypt is concerned about security, not only security in its border, and also there are some economic interests. Before the toppling of Gaddafi regime, Egypt used to send many workers used to work in Libya and sent back the millions of dollars to their home country. That was a key revenue for Egypt. So I think Egypt is willing to support. Right now, it seems to be a bit more accurate, and we could say they are looking for some sort of stability in order to prevent any attacks in its border. And in this case, I think they could also work with Turkey. I think Turkey is not against with any country. Turkey's its position, it's very clear, is supporting legitimacy of the country. So if they are interested to find a political solution, and if they recognize GNA as a legitimate institute, then they should support any initiative is around a peaceful solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there is one question also from our audience. Actually, there was a couple of questions, but I picked the one that seems interesting. Actually, he directed the question to Mr. Jalal, but any of you can answer. They are asking whether intra-group rivalry, the rivalries within GNA or LNA, would such rivalries deepen, or how they can affect the continuation of the conflict? For instance, would there be like leadership change, or if there would be from here where we can go with this new leadership? So there is a question from the audience like this.
Yeah. Okay. Very quickly. As I said earlier, I mean, clearly since June, there has been a growing number of indications and clues and suggestions that, of course, there's and even evidence of growing internal divisions within each of the big two sides, the West and the East. And in the East, I would mention just two trends, I would say, that actually could combine together. There's clearly, and in a certain way, an absolutely certain way, Egypt and Russia agreeing that they would like to see more, if they can, they would like to see more Gaddafi-era technocrats. So I'm not talking about that whole business of bringing back Saif al-Islam. I'm not talking about Ahmed Gaddafi in Cairo or anything like that. I'm talking about like very often not very famous Gaddafi loyalists that could make a comeback, and those would be seen as positive on the part of both Cairo and, of course, the main driver behind this is Russia. And this is something that will probably happen in a gradual way, but a mistake is always possible. If there's a transfer in the favor of more green figures that happens a little bit too abruptly, then it could cause a conflict within the East in some shape or form. The other phenomenon that I would like to mention is the Awagar in Benghazi. It's the biggest tribe. It's not a very prestigious one, but it's large demographically. And it's very powerful within Benghazi. They really took advantage of the last few years of war, and they would like to become more and more assertive. So if there's a change in leadership at the top of the LNA, you could see phenomena like this one, the Awagar in Benghazi, take advantage of that moment of confusion to push back some of the actors, and you could have a conflict. Regarding Haftar, we talked a lot about Haftar. He's 77, right? What does it mean concretely? He has, in the year where he turned 77, he got demolished militarily next to Tripoli. So concretely, what it means is that even the Emirates are talking more and more about his son, not Saddam. I'm talking about Khalid. Khalid as the successor, at least at the top of, at the helm of the LNA. And if that happens, you will inevitably have some actors in the East that will question his authority or legitimacy and will look for some trouble, and that could translate into an armed clash. Within the West, you have also divisions. And I would like to say that this is a challenge for Turkey, and I think there's enough information so far that would allow any observer to know that Turkey has been quite smart so far. It has been looking for neutrality because there are some actors that are very, very, very pro-Turkey, and they think that that will suffice for them to get the best positions and get power and use all the military presence of Turkey to kind of pursue their own agenda as ambitious politicians. But so far, Turkey has avoided that. It has actually gone out of its way to support some of the actors that are not as associated or as closely identifying with this notion of being pro-Turkey. So again, if there's for whatever reason there's everything goes back into a war logic, then maybe the disruption will be so big that Turkey would not be able to preserve that kind of balancing act of trying to be very firm, very neutral, and not take sides. If there's a war logic that re-erupts for whatever reason, then maybe the likelihood of making a slight mistake will become more substantial. In that case, you would see not only clashes, which I think will happen anyway, but also more importantly, a situation that is so dangerous that Turkey will have to take sides. And if that happens, that it could get worse and worse, and you would end up with maybe a relatively serious conflict within northwest Libya. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there any comments, Mr. Norman?
Yeah, I'd like to just build on one point about the West. Is one of the dynamics that we've seen come out of this diplomatic initiative is the fact that the GNA is held to a higher standard than the authorities in the East. And you can see this because all the international pressure, etc., is on the government, on the GNA, while the East isn't being factionalized the same way. So now with Sarraj resigning, there's going to be a lot of people who wouldn't mind his role, and how this actually develops is going to be very interesting. And you have people already trying to exploit this with Ahmed Mitig, who signed a deal with Haftar and apparently was MB backed. And he's called, some people call him the miracle child, some people call him the political orphan. So how the GNA moves forward with this, and on Turkey, it's backed the UN government since day one. So it is in Turkey's interest to see next month's conference go well, for the GNA to consolidate. So the factionalism we're seeing perhaps going to develop needs to be avoided. As long as the LPA and the institutions that came out of the LPA remain legitimate, it's going to require more work in that regard.
Okay, so we can close the session probably here, and I would like to thank all of you for taking part at our panel, and we hope the viewers enjoyed the panel and also benefited from it. And we will continue to do more work on Libya, and whenever we do such panels, we can announce it from our webpage. And again, I would like to thank you all, and hope to see you soon. Thank you.